Kia ora katoa. This is the 18th day of the hearings of Plan Change 7, and the first business this morning is the submission of the Royal Forest and Bird Protection Society. Good morning.
Good morning, kia ora. Tēnā koutou katoa Commissioners Solomon, Shepherd and Van Voorthausen. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Ko tōles tōku maunga, ko wai makariri tōku awa, ko Nikki Snowink tōku ingoa, ko ahau te tangata titi mō te ngāhiri me te manu. My mountain is Tōles, my river is Waimakariri, my name is Nikki Snowink, and I'm here representing Forest and Bird. I'm the Regional Conservation Manager and an advocate for Forest and Bird. Forest and Bird is Aotearoa New Zealand's oldest conservation organisation, and our purpose to be a voice for nature on land, in freshwater and in the ocean is unchanged since 1923. Forest and Bird takes a strong interest in Canterbury water, especially braided rivers. Our supporters are active in region-wide ecological restoration, biosecurity, and for decades have led and participated in bird surveys on many of Canterbury's rivers and lakes. In fact, there's one happening this weekend, this Saturday, on the Hakateri Ashburton River. We're really busy at this time of the year. I would like to acknowledge some of the other submitters, in particular Dr. Graham Fenwick and his submission on groundwater ecosystems and stygofauna, the WRRP River Care Group, and especially for bringing the work of Dr. Humphrey and the Nitrate in Water Research Group into the fold, and the Christchurch City Council, whose submissions Forest and Bird strongly support. Forest and Bird has not been actively involved in the development of the OTOP ZIP, Zone Implementation Plan. However, we have provided feedback at several stages during the process. I want to acknowledge the hours of genuine effort that many community members have committed to the CWMS Zone Committee process, which we initially supported. We're of the view that the Zone Committee processes went badly awry when the guiding principle of first order priority considerations of the environment, customary uses, community supplies and stock water appeared to be subverted by second order priority considerations, particularly irrigation. Subsequently, we chose to withdraw from the CWMS Zone Committee processes, disheartened by the notion that our key concern, the environment, a first order priority, was not core to the conversation in a process that appeared to be captured and driven by a preference for balancing first order and second order priorities equally. The approach taken with the zone committees, in our view, was fundamentally flawed and further complicated by ambiguous central government policy. Like Dr. Humphrey, Forest and Bird is guided by the principle that the health of the people, and indeed the economy, is entirely dependent on a healthy, functioning natural ecosystem. And for us, the abundance of native species that rely upon healthy ecosystems are indicators of ecosystem health. New Zealand has an extraordinary number of endemic native species. That is, species found nowhere else on the planet except here. This includes 70% of our birds, 100% of our reptiles, frogs and bats, 80% of vascular plants, 38% of our marine species, 84% of freshwater fish, and 80% of our invertebrates. 4,000 of our native species are threatened or at risk of extinction. Threatened means facing extinction, and at risk means they could easily become threatened if conditions get worse. A further 5,000 species are recorded as data deficient, meaning there is not enough information to know if they are in trouble. 76% of New Zealand's 58 native freshwater species are threatened or at risk. 85% of our land reptiles are threatened or at risk, and 91% of our seabirds are threatened or at risk. The main threats are habitat loss, pollution, introduced invasive pests, predation, climate change, and in the case of seabirds, fishing practices. Aotearoa New Zealand's native species are in crisis. Canterbury's alpine-fed braided rivers are hanging on by a thread. The groundwater quality appears to be on an alarming downward trajectory, and the foothill-fed rivers and streams are, at best, on life support. This does not suggest any sort of balance to us. Plan Change 7, in our view, does not go far enough or fast enough in terms of environmental limits or targets. And in Forest and Birds' view, it does not give effect to the NPS, the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management fundamental concept of te mana o te wai. There are three aspects of the Forest and Birds submission that I wish to speak about today, and that is the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management 2020 and te mana o te wai, Indigenous freshwater species habitat, and managed aquifer recharged and targeted stream augmentation. The NPS-FM...
If you would please, Ms Snoring, just pause for a moment. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think I need to add some light.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Please carry on.
That's quite fine. Are you all good now?
Thank you.
Marvellous. The NPS-FM 2020 came into force on the 3rd of September, and the NPS is supported by the National Environmental Standard Freshwater Regulations. Together, these instruments usher in a significant step change for freshwater health. The fundamental concept of te mana o te wai has been embedded in several iterations of the NPS-FM, and in the 2020 version, it is given significant weight, which needs to be given effect to as soon as reasonably practicable. Te mana o te wai refers to the importance of water and recognises that protecting the health and mauri of the freshwater protects the health and well-being of the wider environment and people. Te mana o te wai framework is made up of 6 principles that inform its implementation. There is a hierarchy of obligations that prioritises, first, the health and well-being of water bodies and freshwater ecosystems. Second, the health needs of people, such as drinking water sources. And third, the ability of people to provide for social, economic and cultural well-being now and into the future. This hierarchy is not dissimilar to Forest and Birds' original interpretation of the CWMS first and second order priorities. Te mana o te wai requires a holistic view of ecosystem health, a kiuta ki tai approach from the mountains to the sea, including linking surface water to groundwater and the ocean, and land use to water, and it places the needs of the waterway fairly and squarely at the centre of the decision making. It also requires fresh water to be managed as part of New Zealand's response to climate change. It requires water bodies, degraded water bodies and freshwater ecosystems to be improved, and all other water bodies and ecosystems to be maintained and preferably improved. And I doubt that few communities would disagree with this. The NPS-FM requires the national bottom lines for a range of ecosystem health attributes to be met as soon as practicable, including a new national bottom line for nitrate toxicity in rivers of 2.4 milligrams of nitrate nitrogen per litre. This limit is a huge improvement on 6.9, especially for human health. However, this bottom line misses the mark for ecosystem health. For example, the native fish will likely be long dead before the nitrate reaches 2.4 milligrams. Adopting the Science and Technical Advisory Group's recommendation to MFE for a further nitrate attribute for nitrate for ecosystem health to be set at 1.0 milligrams would be necessary to avert native fish catastrophe. Giving effect to Te Mana o Te Wai appears to tip Canterbury's freshwater management system on its head. Ostensibly, objectives and policies in the Canterbury Land and Water Regional Plan appear to align with the intent of Te Mana o Te Wai, but in Plan Change 7 there appears to be a disconnect in the detail and lack of clarity in practice regarding how and when limits and targets will be met and whether proposed regulation will deliver on desired outcomes. Forest and Bird is concerned that the definition of Indigenous freshwater species habitat in PC7 is incomplete. The list of freshwater species does not acknowledge the full suite of native species that utilise freshwater ecosystems as habitat, including all the fish species, native braided river birds, lizards, invertebrates, and groundwater Indigenous biodiversity, including stygofauna. At-risk and declining species, long-finned eels, and for that matter short-finned eels, appear to be absent from the list. Eels can travel the length of the river during their life cycle, so to them, the entire length of the river would seem as important habitat. Some of New Zealand's most threatened endemic bird species, including wrybill, which is nationally vulnerable, banded dotterel, which is also nationally vulnerable, tarapuka or black-billed gull, which is nationally critical, kaki, black stilt, also nationally critical, and black-fronted tern, nationally endangered, use different parts of the braided river, including the mouth and the hapua or lagoon, the braid plains, the gorges, and the upper reaches in the high country during their life cycle. So again, the length and breadth of the river would seem important habitat for these species. Skinks and geckos likely inhabit rocky outcrops and dry parts of the riverbed along the length of some rivers. We acknowledge that identifying and mapping the whole river as habitat for Indigenous freshwater species is an approach not supported by some submitters because it would become very restrictive. However, we submit that this is perhaps the point of Te Mana o Te Wai as set out in the hierarchy and which supports the concept of ki uta ki tai, from the mountains to the sea, as a holistic approach to managing freshwater ecosystems. While mapping habitat is useful, more important is a rule framework that drives behavioural change to provide for adequate, healthy habitat for all native freshwater species during the different phases of their life cycle. We do not consider the piecemeal approach in Plan Change 7 for mapping habitat for an incomplete list of Indigenous species as adequate to give effect to Te Mana o Te Wai or the Canterbury Regional Policy Statement objectives for freshwater or Indigenous biodiversity. We suggest that an alternative approach could be to consider identifying and mapping freshwater ecosystems in their entirety in a similar way territorial authorities are required to identify significant natural areas. And finally, Forest and Bird have fundamental concerns with managed aquifer recharge and targeted stream augmentation to repair damaged freshwater ecosystems because of significant groundwater pollution or nitrate pollution, over-allocation, and a perceived inability to meet minimum flows and water quality targets. However, if if managed aquifer recharge and targeted stream organisation are to be incorporated as an activity in the Land and Water Regional Plan, the activity status needs to be non-complying. There has to be a compelling case for its use, and its use must only be after all of the other options have been tried in the catchment, including reviewing water takes and reducing pollution sources, or where the situation is dire in combination with these options. Desperate times may indeed call for desperate measures. Forest and Bird contends that managed aquifer recharge and targeted stream augmentation are band-aid solutions and must categorically remain the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. That's where I'm going to leave it. Kia ora.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Snoying. There may be one or two questions. Commissioner Van Voorthuizen, any questions of Ms. Snoying?
Yes, I'm just looking back at your original submission that was lodged, the 40-page document, and that was in two parts. There was a narrative section, 14 pages, and then table 1 running to some 23 pages. In the narrative section, you sought relief, and then in the table, you sought relief. I just want to ask, so was the relief listed in the narrative section, the first 14 pages, was that captured in table 1, or is it in addition to table 1?
It's probably in addition, because I sometimes couldn't see where it would fit. And that sort of leads me back to where I said it looked like the objectives and policy said the right thing, but in effect, what was proposed in the rule framework didn't quite match up. There seemed to be, to me, when I read it, a disconnect.
So we've received Section 42A reports from the council officers, and they've recommended quite a few changes to the notified provisions in response to all of the submissions received. So I'd find it helpful if you could take the original submission and annotate that for us, and you would indicate on there where the relief sought has been satisfied by the changes recommended to us by the officers, and where it hasn't, your relief hasn't been satisfied, and if you still seek the original relief. So it'd be easier for you to do that because you know your submission inside out rather than us doing that. And if you could do that, that would be extremely helpful. Thank you.
I will do that for you.
But other than that, no further questions. Thanks.
Thanks.
Any questions, Mr. Solomon?
Yes, just one, and I refer to your page 13 where you've suggested additional attributes to be included in farm environment plans. Paragraph 60, page 13, and you've suggested mapping of Mahingakai sites, Wahitapu and Wahitaonga. I'm not sure if iwi, Runanga or whānau would want Wahitapu sites held in what is a relatively public document.
Okay.
Because of long-term held fears due to past and current indiscretions, where fossicking and selling of artefacts online have occurred. But I agree, in order to protect these sites, farmers need to know a more defined area from what they do now, so they can avoid adverse effects occurring as a result of their farming activities. I just thought I'd like to let you know that.
Thank you very much. We would support what a Runanga would prefer in that respect.
And I have no more further comments or questions. Thank you.
I'd like to ask a question about paragraph 36 in your submission, please, Ms. Snoying. I know you'll have written that before the NPS of 2020 was published, but the concept of Te Mana o Te Wai was also as part of the previous NPS, wasn't it?
Yes.
And here you're telling us something about what the concept of Te Mana o Te Wai should mean for the purposes of the regional plan. And what I'm unclear about is there some authority that says that that's what Te Mana o Te Wai means for regional plans? How do we know that that's what it should mean?
Well, I guess that's our interpretation of Te Mana o Te Wai, and based on what I've read so far.
All right. And what documents would you have looked at to find out the interpretation of the concept?
I'm thinking about a Southland decision on the Land and Water Regional Plan, maybe. There's an interpretation, or an interim decision, or something from Southland.
Yes, I think I've seen reference to that. I don't think I've ever seen the decision, but I believe I've seen some reference to it.
Yeah.
And as you say, it's an interim decision.
Yeah.
Yes. Anything else?
No, just the national policy statement itself.
Thank you. Yes, it should stand on its own, really, shouldn't it?
Yeah.
Now, there was something else I wasn't clear about. If I ask you to have a look at 57, please, in your submission.
57?
57,
Yeah.
you say the plan change falls short on monitoring the effects on MAR and TSA. Can you point to where you've told us what amendment to the plan change you're asking for in that regard?
For memory, I guess is there a rule framework being proposed for managed aquifer recharge and targeted stream augmentation? For memory, it's been a long time since I wrote this submission and looked at the proposed plan.
Well, I understand time passes and things change.
Yeah.
But when I come to look at that particular request that you're making, and we're taking it seriously, of course, we have to think about all of the proposals that you've made here. I'm just not clear what amendment to the plan change itself you're asking for there. You see, the plan change itself isn't the same as the council's own administrative practice about the amount of monitoring they do and where they do it and that sort of thing. What we're looking at here is there's the document, the plan change, or the change that it will make to the Land and Water Regional Plan. And if you've got somewhere in your quite full submission, the wording that would respond to your request here, I'd like to be referred to it, please.
I might have to come back to you on that one.
All right. Well, that's a fair answer. I'll leave it to you to do that.
Thank you.
Now, paragraph 62 was another one where I wasn't quite clear, and I should give you the opportunity to clarify for me. Now, that can't be quite right. Like you, it's a time since I read it, and I'm not quite clear now what was unclear to me at the time. I must have made the wrong note. Oh. Now, in paragraph 64, you're talking about the environmental standard for plantation forestry, and you say that it's not adequate to ensure the protection of significant natural areas or to achieve the objectives of the NPS. And only yesterday we had forestry submitters submitting to the opposite effect. They said, take all of that out of the regional plan. I'm summarising, and that runs risks of not completely expressing what they said, but the effect of it was, take it out of the regional plan, the NESPF will do the job. So I should give you the opportunity to expand a little, if you wish, on your paragraph 64.
Okay, I believe the NESPF is under review. It was started at some stage, but it seems to have stalled. But I guess our biggest concern with the NESPF is that it might not do what we want it to do and protect those significant natural areas from forestry. So we feel like some of the district plans and the regional plans might need to have provisions in them to ensure that forestry isn't put in places that impact on Indigenous biodiversity and significant natural areas. That is pretty much what I meant by that. We weren't certain that the NESPF was going to do the job, and we are involved in the review of it too, so we would like to hope that we could influence its review.
So ideally, would it be preferable that those protections that you're thinking of were contained in the NES rather than a regional plan?
I actually think they need to be in both for consistency and to ensure that the significant areas are protected and for integration.
All right. Well, Ms. Noy, thank you very much for your opening remarks, which you presented with care, and I noticed that you had notes that you were reading or presenting from, and we're grateful for that. That gives us the context of the detail that we have in the submission. We're grateful to you for coming in to present your submission today. Thank you very much.
Kia ora. Thank you very much. All the best.
Now, the next submission on our business this morning is the submission of Genesis Energy. Who's going to speak for them? Now, gentlemen, we have these documents. We have the original submission, we have the further submission, we have the evidence statements of Mr. Kane, Dr. Mitchell and Mr. Young, and we have a rebuttal statement by Dr. Mitchell. Is that all that we should have?
Yeah, kia ora koutou katoa. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the panel. That is correct, sir. Just to introduce the people at the table, if I may, briefly.
Thank you.
Mr. Kane is to my immediate left. Dr. Roger Young to my near left, and my name is Phil Mitchell. Genesis Energy, sir, has no legal submissions or introductory comments to make. And my understanding from the various witnesses is that they have no corrections to make to their evidence. They have nothing that they specifically wish to highlight for you, but are obviously very happy to answer any questions that the panel may have. But is in the panel's hands as to what they would like to do in relation to the presentation of the evidence statements.
Right, well, thank you. Shall we start with your own evidence, Dr. Mitchell?
Whatever suits you, sir.
Yes, well, that'll suit. You've already confirmed you've got no corrections or updates to present to us?
No corrections, sir, that I'm aware of, and nothing I particularly wish to stress. Perhaps other than to note that despite the volume of the statement, the relief that Genesis is seeking, having seen the Section 42A report and the evidence of the other parties, is pretty confined. It's confined to those two matters.
Two issues, yes. Well, that's quite clear to us. Commissioner Van Voorthuizen, do you have any questions of Dr. Mitchell?
No questions, mainly because of the issue you just highlighted, that the relief sort is now quite confined, and it's consistent with the issues we've had put before us by other electricity generators, Meridian and Trustpower. Trustpower are yet to come, but certainly Meridian, so no further questions or no questions at all. Thank you.
Commissioner Solomon?
No, I have no questions of Mr. Mitchell either, thank you.
Very well. Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. That's, I think, leaves your evidence in the clear. We understand it well.
Thank you, sir.
Next, we come to Mr. Kane. Now, Mr. Kane, is there anything that you need to say by way of update or corrections?
No, everything's as is, sir.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Van Voorthuizen, any questions of Mr. Kane?
No questions, but just to thank you for providing the photos of Irishman Creek and the culvert that's of concern. That certainly helped to understand the issue, and particularly your attachment 5, which shows the extended buffer area in relation to that culvert. That was very helpful to have that provided, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Solomon?
Yes, I just have one quick question at your paragraph 26. How regular does the maintenance clearing occur?
Could you please repeat that?
How regular does the maintenance clearing occur?
It depends on our inspections. So on average, would say to every 2.5 to 3 years. Just depends on what we pick up in our inspections.
Okay, because it relates to my next question for Mr. Young about fish relocation. Do you want me to ask that now, Mr. Young?
Well, we'll come to Dr. Young
Okay.
in a moment.
Okay.
Let's take the witnesses one at a time, if that's okay with you.
That's fine.
Well, I think that, is there anything else, Commissioner Solomon, that you wanted to ask of Mr. Kane?
No, thank you.
Well, then we'll come to Dr. Young. Now, Dr. Young, anything you need to say by way of updating or correcting?
No, I think everything's captured in my evidence statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions, Commissioner Van Voorthuizen?
No questions for Dr. Young. Found the evidence very clear. Thank you.
Now, here's a good opportunity,
Thank you.
Commissioner Solomon.
During maintenance and fish relocation, who are the relevant parties that get notified?
I don't know the exact details of that. That might be a better question for Mr. Kane. in terms of the details of the consent application, but my understanding, I'm imagining that the Department of Conservation local office would be the main party to be notified.
And what species get relocated?
I imagine it'll be all the species that are found, but the particular species of concern that's been has resulted in that reach of the Irishman Creek being classified as the big nose
Yes.
Galaxius, which is particularly threatened.
Yes.
But there will be other species present.
Are they listed in your evidence?
No, they're not, no.
Oh, okay. I have no more questions, thank you.
Commissioner Solomon, do you want to come back to Mr. Kane now to ask the question that you thought that Dr. Young might answer?
Who are the relevant parties that get notified? And I think Mr. Young did answer, and I presume it's the Department of Conservation in the main.
Yes, that's correct.
And do you know of any other species apart from big-nosed galaxias that are found and are relocated?
Nothing that I'm aware of, but I could find out for you if you would like me to.
Oh, thank you, I appreciate that.
We also notify fish and game, so.
Okay. Oh, no, great. Thank you, that's all from me.
So, thank you. We're clear about the case of Genesis Energy. There's two questions, and the one is a matter of more of detail, and the other's a matter of sort of more major political interest about whether the water in one catchment is going to be available for another catchment or not. And Genesis' position on that is very clear and understandable, and we're grateful to you all for coming in and bringing these matters to our attention and explaining and answering our questions. Thanks to Genesis Energy and the three of you in particular.
Thank you very much, sir. And Mr. Kane will provide the answer to Commissioner Solomon's question in writing in the next day or two, if that time frame's acceptable.
Of course.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we have the submission of Blair farming, but I don't see, oh, here we are. Good morning.
Good morning. I've just got to figure out... Oh, help. I'm not a technophobe, I'm just not really good at it.
Ms. Blair?
Yes.
Thank you very much for your submission, and I think we have a presentation, some material that you've put in as well, have we?
Yes, yeah.
I'm just trying to find that right at the moment. Well, there it is. Now, Ms. Blair, we welcome your coming in and speaking to your submission, and we're glad to have the presentation, and we invite you to feel comfortable about presenting it and speaking to it just as you find comfortable.
Thank you very much. I'm quite glad my audience behind me's halved a little bit, actually. That's not my strong point, this. Basically, what I'm here to talk to you about today is a very specific part of Plan Change 7, but the overall view that we have is that farming and conservation are not mutually exclusive, and I hope that that's what I can kind of add into my presentation today. So I'm not here to regale you with clever figures and convincing numbers. I've not had a team of clever people putting together a professional presentation. This is just me talking to you about how this piece of legislation will affect our farm and family. We're a small business, just myself, my husband, and a part-time staff member. We work hard to make ends meet and to be able to continually improve the land we have custody of for future generations. We own 437 hectares in Woodbury, of which 380 or so is effective. The 60 hectares of ineffective land is a mostly dry creek bed which runs through the middle of the farm, tree plantings and ephemeral creeks that have been fenced off. This number is constantly increasing as we fence off more area, which recently included a swampland that has been grazed for many years, and we're hoping to plant a native forest in this area. We run 1,500 deer, 250 finishing cattle, and 6,000 finishing lambs over the course of the year. We usually have about 60 hectares of winter feed in, consisting of swedes, kale, rape, and oats. Of our 437 hectares, 1.78 hectares is in the high runoff risk phosphorus zone. This is 0.4% of our farm. Overseer tells us that the risk of phosphorus runoff to second order streams on our farm is 0.2 kgs of phosphorus per hectare per year. That's an extremely low phosphorus runoff risk. We have 14 different soil types on our farm, most of which are either classed as stony or very stony. Our neighbour's farm is in fact called Stonyhurst to our Parkhurst. Approximately 3/4 of the farm is flat, light soils. We have no irrigation and no permanently running waterways through the farm. The part of the farm that is zoned WRRP is in an area we will never winter crop because it's not suitable for winter feeding. The ground is too heavy and it slopes directly to a creek bed, but the creek bed is fenced off and will be planted in the future. There are large established trees on the other low side of this area, and below that, a fenced off swamp area that I mentioned before the land meets a large dry creek bed, which is full of big trees in the middle of the farm. There is an exceptionally low risk of any phosphorus making it into the waterways. We took over the farm as part of farm succession about 3 years ago. And this time we've planted 2,500 trees, corrected wallow holes that were next to ephemeral creeks, joined the Woodbury Environmental Group, and obtained an overseer nutrient budget as well as a farm environmental plan. We have voluntarily tested for bats and found that they travel through our farm, which was something that EK was very pleasantly surprised to find. And I'm constantly hopeful of finding a roost. We've also undertaken some 20 kilometres of refencing for deer, which has included a lot of fencing of ephemeral creeks, swamp ground, and many potential wet areas. This has obviously been a considerable cost for us, but it aligns with our farm policy of improving the farm for future generations. Society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they shall never sit in. My husband would object to being called old, no doubt, but the sentiment is true. And this is an example on the screen there of an area that we've fenced off and we plan to plant. So what do we want? We want to see the wording in the Nutrient Management OTOP Zone Section 14, page 135, provision 14.417, and page 150, provision 14.517, changed from any property that has part of the property in the WRRP to either any farm that has a specific percentage of land, or changed completely to reflect the actual land that is zoned WRRP. We don't want to be forced into unnecessary consenting because 0.4% of our farm is zoned high phosphorus runoff risk. And we're not alone in our area in only having a small part of the farm in that zone. Several farms in the Woodbury Environmental Group are also in a similar situation, although ours is one of the more dramatic. Our entire farm does not belong in the high-risk runoff phosphorus zone. There is no way that we can lower our winter feed amount to 20 hectares and still be able to feed our animals adequately. Consenting could cost us initially $10,000, And if it's a 4-year consenting limit, then a further $5,000 every 4 years, not including our farmer time, which if you could see me type or put together a PowerPoint presentation, you would know is substantial. $10,000 could buy us 4,000 plants or half a kilometre of fencing. But, like most people, we don't have $10,000 just sitting there waiting to be used. We have 3 small kids, a mortgage and a bank manager they have to bake muffins for on a regular basis to keep them happy. We don't own a boat, a caravan, or even an outdoor table. We can't afford to consent and fence. We can't afford to consent and plant. We shouldn't have to choose, because which will leave the land better, trees or paperwork? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Blair. There may be 1 or 2 questions. Commissioner Van Voorthuizen?
No question, but just to let you know that we've had a number of submitters have drawn our attention to the issue that you're raising, namely condition 7 of Rule 14.5.17 in particular, and the possibly unintended consequence of larger farms that have a very small amount of land in the WRRP zone being captured and therefore winter grazing restricted over the whole of the farm. And various submitters have said, well, that's not fair, and perhaps the provision should be targeted to the area of concern, which is the actual area in the WRRP-Z, not the remainder of the farm. So we're certainly alive to that issue. And
it would be easy for us to fence out that area or confine it just to sheep.
Yes.
But to be fair, like our farm is a high nitrogen runoff risk zone, not a high phosphorus one. And so, forcing us into complying with phosphorus regulations is ridiculous because it's the wrong angle, you know. And it would be a waste of everyone's time and money, putting a consent in for this purpose.
Yeah,
mostly
really
ours.
I just wanted to let you know that we're alive to the issue. We understand the concern, and we'll certainly be thinking about ways that it might be addressed. So.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Commissioner Solomon?
I have no questions either, but I would like to say a picture paints 1,000 words. So, and I enjoyed your presentation, and I enjoyed looking at the photos you produced, and it says a lot without actually having to say anything.
Thank you.
So thank you.
So, Ms. Blair, you've picked correctly what we're about and what we're interested in, and what's important to you is what we're interested in. And you've come to tell us how this plan change would affect your farming, and you've done that very clearly. You've presented professional standard graphical presentation.
Thank you.
You've been quite clear about what you want, so we couldn't have asked for more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Now, Dr. Rankin. Is it convenient for us to take your submission now? Does that suit you?
Yes, certainly, sir.
Well, thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
We have your original submission, of course. We have your evidence statement, your rebuttal statement, and then some PowerPoint slides that you presented in the last few days. Is that right?
Hopefully, sir. There is one other document you should also have, which was a summary of my submission and evidence.
Well, let's make sure that we've got everything that we should have. That's important. Now, something on the protection of Christchurch's drinking water, dated the 19th. Oh, no, that can't be right. It's the 19th today.
It was a document dated the 13th of November 2020.
Well, I've got your original submission, that's clear. do have the summary of your submission and evidence. Now, that's the one you're speaking about, is it?
That's correct, sir.
Dated the 13th.
Yes.
Yes. Good. Well, we have that. And is it true that we've also got some PowerPoints or something like that?
Yes.
So I think we've got all that you've sent us, and so we're here now for you to speak to it all and to explain further as you would choose to do.
Thank you very much, sir. Good morning to you, commissioners, and I'd just like to say thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before you. What I thought I would do is just simply do a final wrap-up, and if I may, I'll just read out what that is. So,
Yes.
Thank you. I've listened to the submissions of some further parties since completing my summary document dated the 13th of November. Many of the concerns and issues about PC7 that I've expressed in my submission, evidence, rebuttal evidence and summary have been traversed by others at the hearing, so I have little to add to what I and others have tabled. I'd just like to emphasise some key points by way of summary. So they are, all Christchurch aquifers will be negatively affected by what PC7 proposes. Aquifer nitrate concentrations could go higher still once the groundwater model is expanded to include all contributions from farming in the Waimakariri catchment that will impact on the Christchurch aquifers. In my view, the Environment Canterbury groundwater model is the result of a plausible, elegant and comprehensive study, and its outputs provide data to inform PC7, notwithstanding all the uncertainties involved. The modelling outputs are in keeping with what has occurred and has been observed in New Zealand and elsewhere in the world, where unconstrained intensive dairy farming on pasture has been practiced and problems with polluted surface and groundwater have arisen. Larger reductions in nitrate leachate permissible from the interzone transfer source area in the Waimakariri zone under PC7 may be needed to meet the proposed Christchurch City Council upper limit of 1 milligram of nitrate nitrogen in the deep Christchurch aquifers. Further, the proposed Christchurch City Council limit, if adopted under PC7, with appropriate requirements and rules to reduce nitrate leaching into the interzone transfer source area, will still mean degradation of Christchurch's groundwater will occur. For example, the median level will actually rise from 0.3 to 0.55 milligrams of nitrate nitrogen per litre, which is an 88% increase. And I have a question to you: is this actually acceptable under the NPS 2020? The option of retaining Christchurch's groundwater quality as it is, which is what I want, and setting a requirement that farming in the interzone transfer source area must meet a limit of about 2 kilograms of nitrate nitrogen per hectare per year, does not preclude dairy farming in the zone, so long as it meets such requirements. Now, I just have one final comment I wanted to make, and this arose out of the presentation by Dr. Metherell to you at the hearing on Monday. And it's with reference to the supplementary data in the Danish nitrate study that I and others had referred to, and which in his view was inconsistent with its conclusions. This is the conclusions of the Danish study. My view is that if that was the case, the paper would have never passed peer review and been published. In addition, the views of Professor Frizzell and Dr. Deborah Woodley, expressed in an article by Fiona Cassie, published in Rata Aotearoa, the New Zealand doctor, concerning nitrates in bowel cancer and a Danish study, also referred to by Dr. Metherell, are not shared by all experts in the field, and this is reflected in the article. So correspondent Casey in her article discusses that the Danish study did actually ring alarm bells for Professor of Public Health Michael Baker at the University of Otago, Wellington, and similarly for Dr. Alistair Humphrey. So I'm in your hands and happy to, that was all I wanted to say. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have of me.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for giving further thought and coming in with a thoughtful wrap, as they say, of your presentation. Thank you. Questions, Commissioner Van Voorthuizen?
Yes, Dr. Rankin, you presented a large amount of evidence for our benefit, but just looking back at your original submission, I was just trying to find the actual relief that you sought or the changes that you asked us to make to the plan change in your original submission. And as far as I can see, you've requested that rules 851 to 8532 be deleted, and then perhaps at paragraph 66 of the original submission, you asked us to implement provisions that would remove dairy farming, irrigated beef farming, and vegetable growing from the areas that might contribute to the Christchurch groundwater. Is that a fair summary of the relief you actually sought in your original submission?
It's some time since I've completely reread my original submission, but I think that does cover most of the aspects that I was concerned about, yes. You have to forgive me, I'm not a planner, so my ability to comment in a really good, lucid way, as you might need, and I know you need, may not have been done with me, so done very well by me. So what I'm relying on is that you, if you consider it appropriate, can attend to these matters appropriately.
Just in one other question, just in its relation to what you've called your final wrap-up document. And it's the last bullet point on that document, the one-page document, where you say that you'd like us to set a requirement that N-loss from land use in that zone should only be 2 kilograms of nitrate nitrogen per hectare per year. And I think in one of your other documents you've suggested that you think there should also be a factor of safety that would perhaps halve that limit, making it 1 kilogram of nitrogen per hectare per year. Are you aware of any land use that can achieve a nitrate nitrogen loss of 1 kilogram of nitrogen per hectare per year?
It's a very fair question, and I can understand that you've had a good thorough look at what I've presented, so thank you for that. Look, I'm not, and all I'm trying to highlight there is the seriousness of this issue in terms of our general understanding of these things. I'm the first to admit that I've done the calculations to the best of my ability, so there may be some dispute with other parties around some of those issues. But what I'm clearly trying to highlight is that it's a significant change from what is currently happening and which could be allowed in the future. And that's really needed to address the situation.
And I understand that, and I'm not wishing to question your calculations. I was just thinking, well, how might this work in practice?
Yes.
And I'm aware that even under forestry, it leaches around about 5 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year, and even from atmospheric deposition, you can get up to 5 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year, even on the surface of a lake. So I was just curious about how that might work, but no, thank you for that. No further questions, thank you.
Commissioner Solomon?
Yes, I just have one question for Mr. Rankin, and it's to do with your evidence in chief at paragraph 16 to 20. I did read your evidence in chief with interest, particularly about the current dairy farming practices in New Zealand and your suggested alternative dairy farming, zero nitrate herd shed dairying. I also read your rebuttal evidence with much interest, And while some of it I found hard to follow because I'm not a scientist, there were some things that I understood well, and it left me alarmed. I'm sure you would have echoed all these same suggestions and concerns to zone committee and community meetings and even in previous hearings. So given this, do you think that you've planted some seeds of change in the minds of people within the agricultural community?
It's a very interesting question. In my involvement in zone committees and in these processes, I haven't really had that much opportunity to openly share these concerns in such a direct way as I have here with you. And it's been a significant disappointment for me because as an interested community member, going along to these meetings, I've often sat in these meetings thinking, really, do these people really understand what they're talking about? When you've got these elephants in the room and they don't even seem to be considering them. So what I'm trying to say is that I don't think these things are widely known in the community. And that even includes these people on zone committees who are making these decisions. I've mentioned these things on a number of occasions to, for example, Federated Farmers representatives. And they have just fudged the situation and basically ignored what I've had to say. I've mentioned it also to other representatives of the dairy industry and also to district council members, and they don't really seem to want to listen. So I would like to think that some of my comments have hit a note with some people, but I fear that with many, they either don't want to know or don't understand or don't really want to engage on those matters. Does that help answer your question a bit?
It doesn't.
Yeah.
Your answer doesn't surprise me either. But your comments hit a note with me, that's for sure.
Oh, thank you for that. I'm pleased.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, not planned this way, but what I wanted to ask about Dr. Rankin is an adequate follow-up to the discussion you've been having with my colleague. Now, we know that the Resource Management Act at a high level is in quite broad language, and it might in some ways be thought to cover things like the health of the people. But we're making a report and recommendations to Environment Canterbury. And with their range of activities, they don't really include those of a public health authority. And I suppose they would be thinking of the District Health Board as being the public health authority, though they might recognise that you can't have complete walls between these different kinds of activity. But here we have a body which isn't a public health authority as such, which is inclined to take the view that the standard for drinking water settled by the appropriate authority under the health hierarchy, if that's the word, is there for them to work to and isn't there for them to question. And we've been given some understanding about a review that might be coming up of the drinking water standard in respect of nitrates. Almost certainly it will be coming up, but we don't have any clear idea about when. And there's certainly no basis on which we could say in our advice to the regional council that the limit, the maximum acceptable value, you'll know that term, in the drinking water standard is not any more reliable and is definitely going to be changed. Aren't they inclined to say, well, if and when it's changed, we'll have to see whether that has consequential effects for what we do, but in the meantime, we're working towards what is the official drinking water standard, which was reviewed and revised as recently as 2018. Now, why have I got that wrong?
No, I think that's right, yes.
Yes. Well, Dr. Rankin, it's very good of you to have come in and to presented all your material as you have and given us considerable pause for thought. And it's good to meet you, and we thank you for your attendance today.
Thank you, sir.
Now, the next item on our agenda for this morning is Lovelock Livestock. Have we heard at all from Lovelock Livestock?
No, I've not heard anything from them and they're not here.
No, all right. Well, the next after that is that at 2 o'clock we're going to have the Next Generation Farmers Trust, and that's an important and major part of the agenda for the day, and I think that we should now adjourn until 2 o'clock, should we? All right, we'll adjourn till 2 o'clock.